everybody. Welcome to our Project Prothonotary webinar. So I'm Savannah Jordan. I'm the Habitat Education Manager here at the Wildlife Federation. And we also have Matt Johnson. He's the Center Director of Audubon's Beidler Forest. So we also just want to give a special thanks to our partners and specifically the SC State Credit Union. They are sponsoring this webinar, so we are just very grateful for that. And here's also a list of our other partners that we have been working with on this project, and we're super grateful for all of them. And so we're going to start out with the South Carolina Wildlife Federation and what our role is in this project, and we're going to go all into all about Prothonotary Warblers, and then Matt's going to give his presentation about a really cool project that he is working on. And so Prothonotary Warblers are a neotropical migrant. And I'm gonna stop my video so I can look at this. So they're this really beautiful, vibrant yellow bird. And they're called neotropical migrants because they migrate from the New World tropics or the neotropics to North America. And they'll fly thousands of miles south for the winter and then return here to the Eastern North America in the spring to breed. They're habitat specialists, so they do require certain elements for their breeding habitat, such as water and large trees. And they nest specifically in secondary cavities of trees. And so they are one of the two wood warbler species that nest in secondary cavities. But this is a really cool concept. So secondary cavities, they're old woodpecker nests or tree snags or cypress knees. But this is really good news for us because it gives us an opportunity to help them by installing nest boxes in suitable breeding habitat. And if anybody knows what the other warbler is that nests in secondary cavities, you can put your guesses in the chat box. But Matt and Jay, you're not allowed to guess.
Okay.
All right. And while y'all are thinking about that, we'll just keep talking about these. Oh, go ahead.
Just to let you know, Mary, who's had Prothonotaries go into her box for 4 years in a row, she was the one to answer correctly. It's the Lucy Warbler. I'm pretty sure that's correct, right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So Mary wins the prize.
Yay! Awesome job, Mary. All right. Yeah. So the Lucy's Warbler is the other wood warbler that nests in secondary cavities. Awesome job. So there's a few breeding facts that I have for you guys. What's really cool is the males, they'll come first and they'll kind of display at potential nesting sites. So he'll mark potential nest cavities with pieces of moss or cypress needles. And he'll display to the female, kind of repeatedly entering and exiting the nest cavity. And the female, she'll ultimately choose which place she likes the most, kind of like house hunting, you know, and then she will finish building the nest. And what's really amazing about these birds is that they've been found to return to the same nesting site year after year, which we call high nest site fidelity. So it's just really amazing that these birds are so smart and they can return to the exact same place each year, especially if they have success in the previous years. And so their egg laying begins late April, and the eggs you can see in the picture here. This was actually at Sumter National Forest, where we have a few boxes up. Their eggs are white with little rusty brown spots, and the nests are usually cup-shaped and made of like grasses and old leaves and cypress bark. And they'll lay about 1 egg per day until the clutch is completed. And their incubation will begin when the penultimate, which is just a fancy term for second to last egg, is laid. So now we're going to kind of get into their conservation concerns and, why we're focused on this bird. And so they're considered a bird of conservation concern, and that's with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and with the Partners in Flight watch list. They consider this bird a conservation concern, and this mainly is because their population has declined by 31% in the last 50 years, mainly due to habitat loss. And it's not only a loss of habitat here in their breeding grounds, but also within their wintering habitat in Central and South America, where their mangrove forests continue to suffer from deforestation. And then other threats to their populations are brood parasitism, which is basically where brown-headed cowbirds, they'll lay their eggs in the nests of other species, and they'll often outcompete those young for food. And then other competition from other species that may use the same cavities or the same nesting boxes, like brown-headed nuthatches or tufted titmice or Carolina chickadees. But these are they're still native birds, so they're protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So with our nesting boxes, we leave them be if they want to use these boxes. And it's also important to note that their population was previously at a 42% decline, and it was just updated this year at 31%. So even though 31% is still a pretty high number of population decline, it kind of tells us that there's some progress being made to help stabilize their population. And this could, be through the protection of the wetlands they use for nesting and projects like these that utilize nesting boxes.
Hey, and Savannah, if I can interrupt just for a second.
Yeah.
And, Matt can chime in too with this. Yvette had a question, and I think you kind of hit on it just a little bit with the site fidelity, but says if you have a nest box up, will they return to the same nest box the following year? And I know, Matt has tagged some birds out there. So I don't know if you've seen the same tag birds, on the same nest or maybe even natural cavities, but either of y'all can, speak to that.
Right. Yeah. So I think it definitely depends on their success in previous years. And I know that Matt, he'll have a lot more good detailed information about that. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And I would say we have had birds that, that we've banded that have returned to the exact same nest site. So the answer to the question is there's a good chance. I would say far more often we have had birds that have returned to the same area and maybe not necessarily selected the exact same nesting site. So the site fidelity is super strong, like maybe down to the same acre. And then if there are not a large availability of cavities in that area, then I'd say there's a very good chance they may return to the exact same box.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Good question, Yvette.
Yeah, that was a really good question. Thank you, Matt. So the South Carolina Wildlife Federation definitely has a history with Prothonotary warblers over the past few years. And Jay, he has helped install like 400 plus boxes all over South Carolina, including SCDNR properties, state parks, Sumter National Forest, Harbison State Forest, the Palmetto Trail, and that's just to name a few. And so we have a good bit of them just all across South Carolina. And so Project Prothonotary, this is a continuation of that. And it was made possible by a grant from Duke Energy's Habitat Enhancement Program, which we're very grateful for. And this project focuses primarily on the Catawba-Wateree watershed, which includes the Catawba River, but of course only in South Carolina, and then all the way down to Lake Wateree. And so the mission of this project is to restore bird nesting habitat for Prothonotary warblers by installing nest boxes. And so this is a list of where we have put up 80 nest boxes for this project. And it's really great because Lansford Canal and Andrew Jackson State Park, they're public places that you can go and see these boxes, and hopefully that we will have some Prothonotary warblers nesting in. And so it would be amazing to see, just get to witness firsthand their life cycle and see these gorgeous birds in these public places. And so our goals, we've already met one of them, installing the nest boxes. And then we're also going to be monitoring these nest boxes during the nesting season to record their usage and their nest success. And the people that or the properties that we put these nest boxes up at, they are actually going to be the ones doing the nest monitoring. So they're getting volunteers, and they're really engaging their communities in conservation efforts. And it's really just promoting citizen science through what we're going to be using, which is Nest Watch. And we'll get into that in the next slide. But ultimately, it's to assist the population recovery for the Prothonotary warblers. And so a little bit about nest box monitoring. It goes very into depth, but we're going to keep it brief. But Nest Watch, it's basically just a nationwide online database that tracks the status and trends of the reproductive biology of birds. And it has a lot of good long-term data that's super valuable for the scientists and biologists that are studying these birds and other birds. It's not just Prothonotary warblers, and just is able to give them some more data to use to see how land use can affect birds. So we'll determine the success of this project through nest monitoring. And Nest Watch basically teaches people about bird breeding biology and engages them in submitting nest records. So there'll be citizen scientists that will submit their nest records to an online database. And those observations are compiled with those of other participants in a huge nationwide effort to better understand and manage the impacts of environmental change on bird populations.
Hey, Savannah, if you don't mind me interrupting one more time.
Yeah.
We just had kind of an interesting, question, and if you have any experience with this, and Matt, of course. The question was, is a suburban backyard in Somerville an attractive site for these birds? And then, there's a question about dimensions too, box dimensions, which I can send to them. But, just real fast, I grew up on Lake Murray, and Lake Murray, has a lot of houses. But there are areas where, there's houses next to a large forest with water, of course, that's still. And so even on Dreer Island State Park, which is, it's heavily visited. There's a lot of people there, and there are breeding Prothonotaries there. So that's my 2 cents, but I'd love to hear, if y'all have any examples of that too.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because we actually have a few boxes that we installed on Lake Wateree. And so, as long as the habitat elements are there, there's a good chance. And like we said, those habitat elements are, large trees. You're going to want to have a more shaded area. You're not going to want super thick mid-story. And you also want to have a presence of water. They're more likely going to be in an area like the Beidler forest, where it's swampy and all that. And Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
I think y'all hit the nail on the head. I think if the habitat characteristics are there, then you have a good chance. And I think, Jay, you made a good point in the chat. It can't hurt to put a box up. If a Prothonotary doesn't use it, something will use it. There are lots of cavity nesting species, and some of those, like brown-headed nuthatch, is a good example of one that also seems to be in decline. maybe there's not a huge overlap in the habitat use of a brown-headed nuthatch and a Prothonotary, but, putting out nest boxes is always a good way to supplement, the available cavities in your surrounding area. So if you have any question of whether they may be around, can't hurt to try.
Good. Thank you, Matt. Thanks, Savannah.
Yeah, yeah. And Matt, I love what you said about it can't hurt to try, because you're going to be helping some species of bird, which is always cool. So if it's not a Prothonotary warbler and it's something like a chickadee, that's still amazing too.
Or you might be helping some kind of insect out. Oftentimes when we clean these out, we're knocking off little wasp nests. And you think about, hey, watch the summer tanager feed, and some other birds, that's what they're going after. So, if a cavity is not going to go to waste. So if you think that, it's a good spot for a bird box, specifically a Prothonotary, if that's what you want, pop one up and see what happens. Typically they don't go to waste. And that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, that's really good. Thanks, Jay. So Nest Watch does have a manual that will be setting the standards we'll be using for nest monitoring for this project. And it's available on their website, and we can provide that link in the chat box at the end. It also has just a ton of great information if you want to learn how to monitor a nest in your own backyard. And it has a lot of good nest identification tools, and it'll teach you how to collect your data and submit it online. And it helps you to see data from other people that have been doing this as well. And so each place that we've installed these nest boxes, we'll be monitoring those boxes during the nesting season. And so the data that they collect along with photos will then be submitted to Nest Watch's online database. And it's just so important for researchers to have this, to learn more about birds and how we can help them. And I did see another question about cleaning the boxes. So yes, at the end of or it would probably be best to do it in the winter. Boxes will be cleaned and then repaired, if any screws are loose or anything. And that just consists of just taking the old nest material out, and any wasp nests that are in there, remove those, and then they'll be ready for the next season. And so next up, we have Matt that's going to be talking a little more in depth about a really awesome research program that he's involved in at Beidler Forest. So Matt, I will let you take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you, Savannah. And thank you all for tuning in, for all the great questions. Keep them coming. And Jay, pop in whenever you want to address any of them. And I would just also say thank you to Savannah and Jay, not only for inviting me to speak, but also for all the great work that you all are doing and the Wildlife Federation is doing around the state for all birds, but in particular for this swamp canary, the Prothonotary. As Jay and Savannah alluded to, my name is Matt Johnson. I'm the Center Director at the Beidler Forest Audubon Center. This is a view from the boardwalk at the Beidler Forest Audubon Center. I've been there for about 10 years and I've had the good fortune to get to work with this species a little bit during my time with Audubon. So I feel very fortunate. And I'm going to turn my video off just while I'm presenting here, and we'll pop back on when we get to questions. But let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. Just for orientation, for anybody that may not be familiar, here's sort of a map of the state showing our location. Beidler Forest is an 18,000 acre sanctuary. It's located in 3 counties, Orangeburg, Berkeley, and Dorchester. And it's within the Four Hole Swamp watershed, and that originates sort of just east of Columbia and Calhoun County and proceeds for about 60 miles, sort of paralleling I-26 headed towards Charleston. before it takes a sharp downward turn and dumps into the Edisto River, not far from St. George on this map. And we have a visitor center. So if we click to the next photo, we are open to the public, been open since 1977. And I'll talk a little bit more at the end about how you can come and visit, but I do see some familiar names on this webinar. Thank you all for joining. And some folks that I know I've seen at Beidler and who have come to see Prothonotaries and other things. So definitely encourage you all to come visit, especially as we are enjoying this warm weather, getting into the very start of our spring migration. So a very exciting time of year and a good time to be talking about the species. And the boardwalk that I noted that you saw on the last slide is our sort of main access to Beidler, and it goes into a portion of the sanctuary that is old growth. So it's one of 2 old growth forests in South Carolina. And it's kind of what I think I'm very, very fortunate to get to work in this very unique ecosystem. And it probably represents what a lot of the low country of South Carolina, the southeastern United States would have looked like 400 or 500 years ago. And it may have been sort of what the classic Prothonotary warbler habitat looked like. And so I'm going to be talking about some of the work that we've done there with this species. We can click to the next slide. But I just want to note that, as we've been talking about, this bird is a cavity nester, and in areas that have mature forests where there are still abundant cavities, those birds still use natural cavities. But in a lot of locations, those forests have been logged at some point in the past. And while there's maybe mature trees there today, there may not be the availability of natural cavities, dead or dying trees, rotted out trees, tree limbs, those sorts of things. And so the work that the Wildlife Federation is doing is critically important because you're sort of supplementing the available cavities for this species and for other species that depend on cavities as well. At Beidler, we do install some nest boxes, but a lot of our birds rely on natural cavities. So if you click once, I think we have a photo of a bird. There you can see the little female poking her head out of the cypress knee. So a lot of cypress knees are used as nesting locations at Beidler. But I want to just give a quick shout out to our team, Emily Davis, Kristen Threet, Ricky Cubby, and our master bird bander, Jen Tyrell, and a whole host of other people that make the work that happens at Beidler go forward, especially a lot of our work around this species. So some of what I'm talking about today truly is a team effort, and includes a whole host of volunteers, a lot of people that have made financial gifts, all those sorts of things. But as I sort of mentioned, I've been fortunate to work with this species. And if you look at this bird on the left, you may notice a couple of things going on. When I came to Beidler in 2013, there was actually already a program in place that our staff at the time encouraged me to continue, and it included us, catching these birds and banding them. And we were banding them in a way that would allow us to uniquely identify them. So you'll notice on this bird on the left, on its lower leg, it has 2 bands. You can't see it in this photo, but on the other leg, there will be 2 more bands. And we use a unique arrangement of colors that on each bird so that we can basically identify that individual bird without having to recapture it over and over again. And it's allowed us to really get a lot of interesting information about what is happening during the nesting season at Beidler. And one of the things that allows us to do is so often, and this happens with birds other than Prothonotaries, you may see this with hummingbirds or bluebirds, where you have a hummingbird show up at your hummingbird feeder in November, or maybe not in November, but in September or October, and then a hummingbird shows up at your feeder in March, and you assume it's the same one. But do we actually know it's the same one? We know birds show high site fidelity, but obviously birds move around across the globe. And so one of the things that banding allows us to do is to be able to say, yes, from one year to the next, we know that this is, precisely this individual. And there's 2 parts to that. One, as Savannah and Jay have already mentioned, these birds show high site fidelity. So we're able to look at their return rates from one year to the next. 2, the other part of that is the truth of it, which is that for a lot of these birds that migrate, they only spend part of their life with us. We only get them in this case for the nesting season. but they're, you know, they're spending their migratory time of year and they're wintering their non-breeding time of the year somewhere else. So part of what we have wanted to know, in addition to learning about what happens at Beidler in the breeding season, is where do they go when they leave Beidler? What are their habitat requirements? You know, what kind of habitat? You know, Savannah mentioned mangroves. What are they using in that non-breeding season, and where are they going? And so, you know, starting in 2014, we started to really look at that, and it coincided with sort of the miniaturization of technology that allowed us to start to answer questions about these really small birds for the first time. And so if you take one last look at that photo of the bird on the left, you may notice on its back, it's got this little tiny device that is maybe, you know, an inch long and half an inch wide. And that little device is a tracking device that that really, for the first time, starting in 2014 and 2015, gave us some insight into its migration. But really quickly, before I go into that, I thought I'd just mention a little bit about what comes up most often when I give these presentations, which is how do you catch these birds to put the bands on them? So if y'all would click forward to the next slide, I just threw in here a series of photos that kind of shows how we catch at least the male Prothonotary warblers, which we've talked about them showing high site fidelity, so returning to the same places year after year. They're also highly territorial, so they defend territories in the breeding season, and they defend them from other males. So if you can be in an area that is a territory for Prothonotary warbler, and if you can do something to pretend like you are another male, that Prothonotary will come over and he will not be very happy. And so we actually do that using a decoy, which is what you're looking at here. This was a hand carved decoy by a gentleman down in Charleston named Pat Campbell, who made this very generously for us. And essentially what we do along the boardwalk at Beidler is we set up a net that's about 25 or 30 feet long. It's called a mist net. It's a very fine mesh. If you click on the next, if somebody can click, we'll see on the next photo what that net looks like. But essentially we play the song of the Prothonotary warbler, and we put out the decoy. And when we do that, their actual bird sees the yellow of the decoy, hears the sound, believes that another male is trying to take over his territory, and in the process of trying to to chase away the fake bird, flies into this net. And the net is designed to, as you can see here, to catch the bird. It has a lot of give to it, but the bird cannot get out, and so we can very safely remove it from that net. And all of this is done, I just sort of want to clarify, with a lot of training and expertise, and with both federal and state permits. So we discourage anyone from going out to try to ban unless you're licensed and trained. And also, just maybe something to think about, you know, the question of if we use our phones to play the songs of birds and it calls that bird over, is, you know, the sort of the ethics behind that. And I always kind of caution people from doing that at Beidler, just because the birds can sort of get acclimated or scared to the songs, and we kind of have to do it for research purposes, but we kind of discourage it outside of that, and that's kind of a gray area, but I won't go into. But that is kind of how we catch them. So next slide shows the hardest part is getting them into the net. I'll say that once they are in the net, we can safely remove them. We put a series of bands on them and get each of these bands a number. So every bird gets an alphanumeric combination. And if you click to the next slide, we have one of the birds in hand. And the band there that you see that's kind of silver, that's a band associated with the U.S. Geologic Survey, out of what is called the Bird Banding Lab. And every bird that's banded in North America gets one of these, or that's banded in the United States, I should say, gets one of these bands that has a 9-digit number on it. It becomes like the bird's social security number. The bird will wear that band the rest of its life, and that number will always be attributed to that individual. So that's sort of how we keep track of all of the different birds that are banded across the United States, and different band. You know, there are different sizes for different size birds. So you can kind of make sure you're getting the right size for each individual. So, you know, once we have the bird, we can let it go. And again, we're monitoring them throughout the breeding season. We're monitoring their next boxes. And then we're monitoring them from 1 year to the next. But the banding doesn't answer the question of where do they go when they're not at Beidler. And so if you click forward, I thought I'd just give you a little bit of background on some of the research that we undertook and the sort of the big questions behind it. And if you click one time, I think it has a little bit of text in there, but in 2014, we joined a whole host of other organizations to form what was called the Prothonotary Warbler Working Group. And essentially it was to start to try to answer these questions. And we approached it from a range-wide perspective. So can we do similar things across the breeding range of this bird, sort of like everything that's in yellow, and do it in the same way so that we could compare, we can compare our data across all these locations. And so we standardized not only like the methodologies for what data we were collecting when we capture the birds, but also for beginning to look at some of the tracking technology that was available to help us understand their migration. And it comes down to this concept that I'll talk about really quickly, but is very in depth, which is called full life cycle conservation. And so for birds that migrate, and as I was just saying, we can be doing, and Savannah alluded to this earlier, we can be doing everything we possibly can for these birds on their breeding grounds, but if they're losing habitat on their wintering grounds, they may still decline, and vice versa is true as well. And you have to take into account sort of their migratory path, their stopover site. So the question is, what are their full life cycle conservation needs in order to reverse the declines that we're seeing in the species? And a second question might be, how connected is their breeding grounds with their wintering grounds? And what I mean by that is, Prothonotaries have a range along the Atlantic coast, from Florida to Maine, across the Gulf, and then up the Mississippi River Valley to, even to southern Canada, but well into Wisconsin, Ohio. And so a question might be, are Prothonotaries that are migrating or that are nesting, say, in South Carolina, are they migrating to the same wintering locations as Prothonotaries that are nesting in Ohio or Louisiana? And it's this concept of migratory connectivity. And if we click to the next slide, you'll see an example from another type of warbler. This is the ovenbird. And I just wanted to show this very quickly because it shows what we would call high migratory connectivity, in that all of the birds that were tracked in the eastern portion of their range, which is what looks like maybe southern Maine or somewhere around there, all wintered in the Caribbean. However, the birds that were tracked in the sort of central, or I guess the western portion of their range, migrated to Central America. So there was a really strong connection between where they bred and where they wintered. And so one of our research questions was, is the same true for Prothonotary warblers? So on the next slide, ultimately what allows us to start to try to answer this questions is this miniaturization of technology. And we used these devices called geolocators, and they essentially record light level data. And you can see on the left here kind of the anatomy of a geolocator. The nice thing about them is that you can make them very small. So just for reference, a Prothonotary warbler weighs about 14 to 15 grams, which is like a little more than a quarter. To put something on this bird that would not, that we don't feel like could affect its ability to migrate, we need to be less than or at 3%, about 3 to 4% of their body weight. And so we need a device that is actually less than 1 gram in size, which is, as y'all can imagine, that's very small. And so the great thing about these devices is that they now come at that kind of size. So these devices were about 0.4 of a gram, meaning that we can put them on these birds and not worry about it impacting their ability to migrate. And we put them on the birds using a little harness that we actually just hand make and super glue to the device. So it is a very sophisticated technology, and we are using a very not sophisticated method for actually attaching it to the bird. But that material in the harness is actually a stretchy elastic material. Interesting, you can get it at like Hobby Lobby. It's usually used for like making jewelry, like bead bracelets. But because it gives, it has some elasticity to it, but it's also very durable. So the story of our research with this involves sort of one bird that we originally tagged back in 2014. think we go to the next slide. We have a photo of that bird. Here he is. So this was the bird we nicknamed Longshot. And Longshot was originally caught in 2014. He was outfitted with one geolocator. We had plans to deploy multiple geolocators in 2015. In 2014, we actually had the opportunity to deploy 3 geolocators as sort of part of a pilot project. It happened late in the season, so for a lot of reasons, we only end up deploying one of them. And it may be intuitive to you all as to why you would want to do a lot of them, but realize that for a tiny bird that weighs 14 grams, that's migrating, by the way, at night down to Central or South America and then coming back, it is a very high mortality part of a bird's life. Probably the highest risk of mortality is associated with that long migration. And so, you know, to put one device on one bird and hope to get that back is that's being very ambitious. But for a lot of reasons, we only did it with one bird, and that's why this bird got the nickname Longshot. But as some of y'all may have heard, the story ended up working out because Longshot, if you click to the next slide, Longshot got the geolocator, and this was in July of 2014. And this was us putting that original device on. Shout out to Julie Hovis, who was a biologist here in South Carolina, who helped us with this original study. And if you click to the next slide, we actually refound that bird in April of 2015. And again, high site fidelity, this bird was in literally the exact same location where we caught it to put the device on in 2014 is where we caught it again, and we recaptured it in 2015 to take that device off. And then if you click to the next slide, there's a photo of that device. And I don't have it on here, but I should just note Max Stone, who's an amazing photographer who took this photo. I should give him credit, and he's done so much great photographic work, as well as Don Warry, who is on here, and many others. But that's that original device. And on the next slide, we were so ecstatic to not only to get that device back, but to actually get some data from it. And this was that original map that we sort of came up with, and realized that, you know, these red dots are not, these geolocators are inherently not super accurate. So imagine a circle of about 50 miles probably around each of those dots to give a degree of error. But you get the general idea of just the amazing migration that this bird took, not only to travel this distance, but to return to within the same half acre that it was the previous year is almost hard to fathom. So we were very encouraged by that. And then in 2015, we did this project with several other birds. And on the next slide, you can see some of these birds and all of our little nicknames. And fortunately, we were very pleased to be able to recover half of these. So if you click, we recovered them from Buckeye, Holly, Aster, and then actually Trillium in the bottom right. Trillium got a geolocator. We put a geolocator on Trillium in 2014. Trillium returned in 2015 with his geolocator. We could not recapture him. So it goes back to the point of not using excessive playback. The whole breeding season, we attempted to catch him to take this device off. And that's something I should clarify. You only get data from this if you can actually recover the device. So it does not transmit in real time. We actually need to recover that unit and sort of plug it into the computer to get data off of it. So imagine our frustration when we were watching this little bird fly around and noted that he had his unit, yet we could not recapture him. But I'm happy to say that in 2016, he returned again, and we were actually able to capture him and get the device off. Jay, I see you on. Do we have a question?
Yeah, man. Just a couple of them. Just my curiosity. How it doesn't track any, and sorry if you talked about this already, but it doesn't track any in the information going back up north, or it does?
Usually the device battery lasts less than a year.
Okay.
So I think maybe in the slide I'm going to show in just a little bit, maybe a few of the birds we got a spring trail, but most of these at this size, this tiny of a device, you're only getting like 6 months of data.
Okay. Okay. And then a question from the attendees. Do you work with researchers in their wintering grounds? And if so, have they ever seen birds that were banned in the US?
Great question. Imagine how many Prothonotary warblers there are in the eastern United States. And if you spent every day for the rest of your life birding in the winter in Prothonotary habitat, you saw one that was banded, that would probably be like winning the lottery. So no, that does not happen very often. However, we do work with several organizations across the wintering range of the species. And I actually, I had the good fortune of getting actually to go to Panama with some of my colleagues who were at Virginia Commonwealth University, and we went out into some of the mangroves and were actually able to catch Prothonotaries. And while we did not see any birds that were banded that were banded in the United States while we were in Panama, they have been doing that project for a few years, and what they were finding is that they were recapturing birds that they had banded in the mangroves in previous years. So it illustrates site fidelity on the wintering grounds from one year to the next, in addition to seeing it on the breeding grounds, which is kind of interesting. Also, to Savannah's point earlier about mangroves, I can anecdotally say that one of our field sites that we went to, I only went 1 year, but the previous year, while we were there, the researchers were saying that the previous year that we were right next to some development, and they had said that last year that was all mangroves, and now it had all been cleared. And so that's just sort of one small anecdote, but illustrating some of that habitat loss that we're seeing on the ground there. So I think I have maybe one more slide. We can click to that, and then we can finish up and talk through questions. Or 2 more slides. This just shows. I'm going to drop a link to this paper, but this was the original paper that we published with these data, and it shows you, the table shows you how many we deployed and how many we recovered, and we were pretty happy with those numbers. Somewhere around 25 or 30% is usually pretty good. And so in South Carolina, we were thrilled to have data for 3. We actually recovered 4, but one of the devices, the data had gone bad, or like the device had malfunctioned, which was very frustrating. But it also is what happening. We're on kind of the cutting edge of this technology, so a lot of that is still being figured out. And even the technology that we maybe used for this study in 2016 or 2017 has evolved quite a bit just in that time. With some of the projects that we're working on now, we're using different technologies and even different ways of attaching the devices. So the next slide actually shows some of the interesting tracking data. And the point I want to show with this is, so you're seeing the different colors represent the different locations for the devices for which we got data. And I just want to point out back to this idea of migratory connectivity. And you can kind of hypothesize to yourself, do Prothonotaries have a high connectivity or low connectivity? And the answer to that question is low. So it did not matter where the birds nested. They all seem to go to the same areas in the winter. And I just want to pause for a second and think about the implications of the answer to that question when we think about bird conservation. So for an organization like Audubon or the Wildlife Federation that works across, all political boundaries, and at least in Audubon's case, we work internationally across the hemisphere, how these birds are migrating, where they're going in the winter, what that connectivity is, has huge implications for conservation purposes. So in this case with Prothonotaries, a lot of them are going to Colombia, South America. So one might then hypothesize, hey, we should get on the ground in Colombia and see if we can identify some of these most important places for Prothonotaries in the wintering months, because potentially if we could preserve some of those places, maybe we are actually having a huge impact on Prothonotaries that are breeding across the United States. And in fact, Audubon is working with a lot of other partners on trying to understand what's happening down there on those wintering grounds. So just a little insight into some of the research that we've had going on. We also do a ton of public programs, banding demonstrations. If you click to the next slide, which is my last slide, I just want an invitation. If you've never been to Beidler, come down and see us. The Boardwalk and Visitor Center right now open 9 to 4, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But if you have a group or a private group and you're interested in coming for a guided tour, we do some of those during the weekdays as well. in addition to on the weekend. And here we are, what is it, February 23rd. I think last year our first Prothonotary sighting was on March 22nd. So we're right at a month away from seeing those first bright yellow birds show back up in the swamp. So again, thrilled to be a part of the conversation. Thank you, Jay and Savannah, the Wildlife Federation, and thank you all for joining. And I'm going to stop there, but I'm hope to see many of you at Beidler, and obviously happy to answer any questions I can.
Yeah, and there's one question I want to get to in a second, but yeah, if you've never seen a Prothonotary, go out to Beidler. If that's, if Congaree National Park is closer, that's a fantastic place too. But if you, if all of y'all have seen one, take friends, family, and connect them to that bird. That's a wow bird. I think Matt said it made their final four, of favorite warblers within Audubon there. But and that gets people it can make people conservationists. We had a dinner once, and one of the birds that we talked about was the Prothonotary, and a woman funded 50 boxes and 50 poles and 50 predator guards because she, at one dinner, she heard about that bird and she had never seen it, and all she saw was a picture and heard me talk about it. So just knowing something that exists can really put into motion some good things, whether that's financially or in some other ways. But please take them out to Beidler and connect them, and maybe we'll make conservationists out of those folks. Oh, and funding, Matt, like how do y'all get funding for the geolocators? Is it through grants, or do you kind of rely on folks making donations, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for allowing me a chance to plug that information. Like Wildlife Federation, we are a nonprofit, so we rely on grants and individual gifts, a whole host of different things to fund the work. Sometimes the devices itself we get through grants. In some cases we purchase them and we think it's important, but a lot of times we work with donors, or we work with other organizations or government entities to provide that funding. So like you mentioned, Jay, we have some of people that just love the birds, and that's what they love to fund, and we rely on that year in and year out to keep these projects like this going. So yeah, if you're interested, we would love your support in whatever capacity you can give.
Just out of curiosity, so many, over 90%, I think you said, of the warblers that were tagged, or at least the ones that whose data you were able to receive, were in Colombia. It seemed like some of those were interior, so I would imagine they were away from mangrove forests. Like I'm always pushing, and me, I'm always pushing shade grown coffee, birds and beans specifically. But was there any information that supported that they're wintering on coffee plantations by any chance?
I'm very glad that you mentioned that, and yes, that was actually one of the insights of the paper, was that it appeared that there were some wintering away from the coast. So we think about mangrove forests being primarily a coastal forest, and while we do know that Prothonotaries use those habitats, the results of the study indicated that they were actually maybe using interior systems. Now, I think those are still wetland systems. Those are river valleys, particularly the Magdalena Valley in Colombia. So my understanding is that they are primarily still using aquatic habitats in the winter, but they may be freshwater and not coastal, coastal saltwater. Do they forage in in coffee plantations? And I don't know enough about coffee to know how close it could be to water. My understanding would be probably not. But that doesn't mean that we know that shade grown coffee, that coffee plantation, especially shade grown coffee, is so important for so many neotropical migrants.
Okay, yeah, just curious. Is there anything that we can do to prevent wasps from making those nice little homes on the inside part of the roof?
Well, I'm very curious to know what you and Savannah think about that. I can tell you that what we do is use bar soap on the surface of the inside surfaces, that seems like the waxy substance maybe prevents wasps from establishing their nest, I guess. The other suggestion would be if you're going to use a baffle, which we always, I think for ours, I know for you guys, we always try to suggest a baffle to keep predators out. And if it has any sort of structure, any sort of spot to flat surface under the baffle, we try to treat that area as well. But I'm curious what y'all do.
We do what you suggest. So I remember you telling me about the soap before, maybe a couple of years back. I've heard of some people putting, maybe tiny screws to make the surface uneven. I don't know how successful they were in keeping the wasps out, but I do know that that's an issue. We just checked, I don't know, 15 or so boxes with DNR, and probably about 3 or so had wasp nests in them. So it wasn't a ton of them. And I think we did get 3 Prothonotary, nests in there too. But anyways, I don't think there's any kind of foolproof, method to keep those guys out that I've found.
I agree. And I think I also would say though, that I don't think that, that wasp will be a deterrent from a bird using the nest. Like I have never seen or heard of the idea of like a wasp is in there and so Prothonotary is not going to use it. Either the wasps are finding the ones that the Prothonotaries weren't going to use anyway, or in some cases, I think potentially the Prothonotaries evict the wasps. I don't know that the wasp being there is a deterrent to use by the bird.
Yeah, and I guess it makes me think about if you have a opportunity to put up a box, don't just put up one if the conditions are right. From what I've read, the male will pick out a handful of cavities, and then the female makes the decision which one. So if you have if you're going to put out one box, put out 3. Again, if the locations are okay. And maybe a wasp gets into one, and you have a few options for that Prothonotary warbler. So just a little thought. Zach Steinhauser wants to know any expeditions to Colombia in the future, and that's probably a no, but yeah, we can always dream. Let's see. I'm in Texas. Do you know how far west they go? Good question.
That's a great question. I think they may occur in East Texas, but a simple eBird search, I think maybe will answer that question for us. So I can tell you the answer here in just a second.
Yeah, and folks,
unless somebody on my call knows.
And folks, if you want to take a peek at that, but folks that aren't on eBird or you don't know how to navigate it, if you want to become a better birder, learn how to use eBird. It doesn't matter where in the world you go, as long as there has been a birder on eBird in that area at some point. You'll see what has been identified there. And so the cool thing is if thousands of people have done it, you really get to see all this data and when birds come through. I mean, almost down to weeks, and so you could search eBird, search in Texas, and see where those Prothonotaries. I mean, I think they do have a map, and they'll show you exactly where they have been seen.
And it turns out they do occur throughout the eastern half of Texas. So I'm going to drop a link to that eBird map of Prothonotaries in case folks are interested.
Cool. Give me just 1 second, Matt. Will chicks return to the same area? That's a cool question.
A great question.
Any data on that?
It's a very interesting question. We have never had, so you can ban nestlings. Right, you'd have to ban them to know if they were to know if it was a returning bird from 1 year to the next. And so we do ban some nestlings. We don't ban a lot of nestlings, but we have never had a bird that we banned it as a nestling return to Beidler. So that is a great question. And from my understanding, the literature is we don't really know. The reality is that a lot of nestling birds don't survive. A bird getting from 0 to 1 is that's the hardest time of its life. And so, that's happening. Are they returning to Beidler if they do survive? I mean, I would have to think so. Maybe they're not returning to obviously they may not return to the exact same territory, but we do not see the same fidelity in nestlings that we see in adults. And the question is why. There could be a lot of different answers, but ultimately, I just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a tricky one. Good question. Let's see. Will Project Prothonotary expand beyond the Catawba-Wateree watershed? Well, we've been putting out boxes. The problem, I mean, with this project, we're going to be getting some really good data. We're going to go out to the boxes because of the funding. The problem with the previous boxes that we installed, we installed them or a lot of them in 2019, then 2020, then COVID happened, and we were just trying to survive. So we didn't get to check, I mean, many of the boxes, most of the boxes. So we're just getting back out this year after kind of recovering to get data from those boxes. So we're working with DNR at a couple places around the Midlands. We had folks down in Defusky Island that installed about a dozen boxes, Call Plantation, Santee Canal Park, I think is Old Santee Canal Park. And I think they have around 10 boxes. And, the numbers usually for the past few years have been around 6 or 7 of them are used by Prothonotaries, and they're out. Checking those boxes out during the breeding season. We've put them up at Lake Conisty, up in the Greenville area. So, the Project Prothonotary, that, is the name of this, the grant that we got, and the project, that Savannah's, leading. But these boxes are all over the state. Now, if you're wanting boxes, you'll just have to kind of reach out to us from time to time. Sometimes we get wood donated, or we have the funding to buy wood, and we can get some volunteers to put some boxes together. So just kind of check in from time to time with us, and we might have some free boxes, for you. But we can get those, hopefully we'll be able to get some by the end of the year this year. I don't really see, give me just one second. Let's see, I had a pair last year, and the first breeding, they had 5 chicks. They then used the same box a second time, and she laid 4 eggs before the chicks hatched. The original 5 returned and kept going in and out of the nest. And in the end, the female abandoned the nest, and so none of the eggs hatched. Is this common? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we see that happen from time to time. I don't know that I would say it's common, but I mean, we have had times when and I've seen this with other species too. Bluebirds come to mind, where eggs are laid, and for whatever reason they're abandoned. A lot of times it can, or some of the hypotheses about that are that there's a predator in the area that has sort of scared the birds away. Obviously, something could happen to the adults. I've seen Prothonotaries that have built a nest, laid eggs, and then they build another nest on top of that nest. I don't know that I would say it's common, but it does happen. And there's some cue to them that either that nest wasn't going to be successful, or there was a predator, or but it is something that you do see happen. I assume, unless you have any thoughts on that, Jay.
I don't have the experience to answer that one. But no, I think, hey, what I took out of it is that she had 5 chicks from the first one, and that is absolutely fantastic. And even though probably most of them didn't make it, they're all recycled outdoors, right, by something else. But hopefully one out of those 5 or 2 out of the 5, made it. So that's a really nice clutch right there. And I think I think we got to all the questions. Savannah, is there anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, just real quick. These are just a list of some places that are publicly accessible. And you can go see the Prothonotary Warblers during the nesting season, which is late April to June. So coming up soon here. And it was exciting that when you said March 23rd was when the first one was seen. So yeah, that's just like a month away. So they'll be here soon. So that's just really exciting. But yeah, definitely go see Matt at Beidler, because that's where I first saw my first nesting Prothonotary Warblers. And it was just amazing just watching them just fly through the swamp. It's just like a little mango, just kind of, and there was actually a bird there that looked so like vibrant. It was like just a little mango sitting there. It was just really cute. So yeah, with that, we are just so thankful for everybody. And Matt, thank you for your awesome information and just telling us about the work being done at Beidler to help Prothonotaries. And we just thank you all for joining us today and all your amazing questions. And if y'all have any other follow-up questions,